December 1952. Deep inside the Kremlin guard chamber, 3:47 in the morning, senior guard Dmitri Volkov's eyes closed for exactly 3 seconds. Joseph Stalin stood in the doorway, observing, saying absolutely nothing. When Volkov jolted awake, Stalin's back was already disappearing down the corridor. The next morning, Volkov's locker was emptied, his family relocated, his entire life erased from official records. No arrest, no trial, no explanation. Just one detail left behind: his brass pocket watch, sitting on his pillow, wound and ticking. That same week, 127 other guards were transferred. NKVD files on the incident were sealed for 50 years. And here's the impossible part: Volkov's watch was later found in 6 different cities across the Soviet Union, thousands of miles apart. The question isn't what Stalin did. It's how a 3-second mistake could erase a man so completely that even his possessions defied the laws of physics. Stalin didn't sleep like normal men. By 1952, his insomnia had become legendary among Kremlin staff. Some nights he'd wander the halls until dawn, checking locks, observing guards, testing the machinery of his own paranoia. The Kremlin wasn't just a seat of power. It was a fortress designed around one man's fear. Over 500 guards rotated through shifts, every entrance monitored, every corridor mapped for sight lines and vulnerability. The expectation was perfection. Not excellence, perfection. Guards stood for hours without moving, without blinking, without showing the slightest hint of human weakness. Stalin's surprise inspections were infamous. He'd appear without warning, silent as smoke, watching for the smallest failure. And when he found one, the response was never loud. It was surgical. Dmitri Volkov had served for 22 years. His record was spotless. Not a single reprimand, not one missed shift. In official photographs from that era, Stalin is the benevolent father, the protector of Soviet workers. In reality, the state he built operated on fear so deep, it didn't need to be spoken. A man could vanish for a joke. A family could be relocated for a neighbor's suspicion. And a guard who failed to stay awake had no margin for error. December 11th, 1952, 3:47 a.m. Volkov had been on duty for 18 hours straight. The shift rotation was brutal that week. Stalin's 73rd birthday celebrations required extra security, and the skeleton crews were stretched thin. Volkov stood at his post near the eastern wing, eyes fixed on the empty corridor. His body ached, his vision blurred, and then, for just 3 seconds, his head dropped. His eyes closed. The world went dark. When he snapped awake, his heart was already hammering in his chest. And there, 10 feet away, stood Joseph Stalin. The dictator's back was to him, already walking away, hands clasped behind his coat. Stalin said nothing. He didn't turn. He didn't stop. He just kept walking, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall until they faded into silence. Volkov's breath came shallow and fast. Had Stalin seen him? Was it possible he'd arrived just as Volkov woke? Or had he been standing there, watching, the entire time? There was no way to know, no way to ask. Volkov completed his shift in absolute terror, every nerve on fire. Hours later, as dawn broke over Moscow, he walked home. Relieved. He'd made it through. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The next morning, Volkov received a summons. Not to an interrogation room. That would have been too obvious. Just a quiet meeting in an administrative office deep inside the Kremlin. A man in a gray suit, no name given, handed him an envelope. "You're being transferred," the man said, his voice flat, bureaucratic. "Temporary reassignment. Routine." Volkov opened the envelope. A train ticket to a remote outpost in Siberia. His family had 4 hours to pack. The man offered no explanation, no appeals process, no paperwork to sign. Just the cold, mechanical efficiency of a system that didn't need to justify itself. When Volkov returned to the guard barracks to collect his belongings, his locker had already been emptied. His uniforms were gone. His personal effects, photos, letters, cigarettes, all removed. And there, sitting alone on his pillow, was his brass pocket watch. It was still ticking. Someone had wound it. Volkov stared at it, hands shaking. He didn't know who had been in his locker. He didn't know who had touched his watch. But the message was clear. They'd been there. They'd seen everything. And they wanted him to know. By noon, Volkov and his family were on a train heading east. That same week, 127 other guards were transferred. None of them had committed crimes. None of them had been accused of anything. They simply vanished into the machinery of Stalin's state, their names erased from duty rosters, their faces forgotten. 3 weeks later, NKVD Major Yuri Petrov noticed something strange. He was tasked with processing administrative transfers, the bureaucratic term for relocations that carried no formal charges. He saw Volkov's name. Then he saw 126 others, all transferred within days of each other, all from the same guard rotation, all assigned to the December 11th overnight shift. Petrov was a careful man. Asking questions in Stalin's Soviet Union could be fatal. But something about the precision of the transfers bothered him. He checked the official logs. No cause listed. Just a single signature. Joseph Stalin. No orders. No explanations. Just a name and a date. Petrov dug deeper. He discovered that every guard who'd been transferred had some form of contact with Dmitri Volkov. Some had worked beside him for years. Others had merely shared a meal in the canteen. It didn't matter. Proximity was enough. The transfers were executed with surgical efficiency, each family relocated to a different remote corner of the USSR. Magadan, Vladivostok, Murmansk, Novosibirsk, far enough apart that they'd never compare stories, far enough that they'd never piece together why. Petrov realized he was looking at something most Soviet citizens never saw: the invisible machinery of Stalin's paranoia in motion. And he realized something else. He was now part of that machinery. Knowing too much was its own crime. January 1953. Petrov received a report from Magadan, a frozen wasteland at the edge of Siberia. A local NKVD officer had confiscated personal items from a recently arrived family. Among them, a brass pocket watch, engraved with the Kremlin insignia. The officer recognized it immediately and reported it up the chain. The watch was returned to Moscow and placed in an evidence locker. A month later, another report. The same watch, same engraving, same brass casing, had been found in Vladivostok, over 4,000 miles away. Then Murmansk, then Tashkent. Each time, the watch appeared in the possession of someone connected to the December 11th transfers. Each time, it was confiscated and sent back to Moscow. Petrov stared at the reports, his mind racing. It was impossible. A single watch couldn't be in 4 cities simultaneously, unless it wasn't the same watch. Petrov requested access to the evidence room. He examined the watches side by side. They were identical, perfect replicas, down to the engraving, the scratches, the worn leather strap. Someone had commissioned duplicates. Someone had distributed them deliberately, and Petrov knew who. Stalin was sending a message, not to the guards. They'd already been erased. To the NKVD itself. The watch was a marker, a symbol that meant, this man failed me. This man is tainted. Watch him. The system didn't need written orders. It operated on implication, on fear, on the unspoken understanding that Stalin's will was absolute. Volkov never spoke about the incident. In his frozen Siberian outpost, surrounded by men who'd been similarly exiled, he kept silent. His family asked no questions. They'd been trained in Soviet silence, the kind that kept you alive. He requested the return of his brass watch. The request was denied. He never asked again. That winter, one of the guards from Volkov's original shift died. Official cause, heart failure. Natural causes, he was 34 years old. Another guard, stationed in the Far East, simply vanished. No death certificate, no record, just an empty bunk and a transfer order that led nowhere. Petrov saw the pattern. Stalin wasn't just punishing Volkov. He was erasing the moment itself. Every witness, every person who might remember that night, who might whisper about it, who might plant the seed of doubt that Stalin's security could be penetrated. The dictator was editing history in real time. One life at a time. In March, Petrov took an enormous risk. He accessed Stalin's private logs, documents almost no one outside Stalin's inner circle ever saw. The entry for December 11th was brief. Night inspection. Dmitri Volkov, 3 seconds. Nothing else. No orders. No directives. But the transfers had begun within hours. Petrov flipped through earlier logs. He found similar entries. A cook who'd burned bread. A clerk who'd misfiled a report. Each followed by waves of transfers, demotions, disappearances. And in several cases, objects, pens, notebooks, keychains were replicated and distributed as markers. Stalin had built a system that operated on pure implication. He didn't need to write orders. His word, his presence, his silent observation was enough. The NKVD understood what needed to be done. Petrov closed the logs. His hands were shaking. He now knew too much. And knowing too much in Stalin's Soviet Union was a death sentence. Over 3 months, 127 guards were transferred. 89 families were relocated. 14 men disappeared entirely. No death records, no burial sites, just gaps in the archives. The Soviet press, meanwhile, celebrated Stalin's vigilance, his tireless dedication to protecting the motherland. The public saw routine security rotations. Behind the scenes, Stalin was purging witnesses to a single 3-second lapse. Petrov believed he understood the system. Then he discovered something that shattered his certainty. One guard from the December 11th shift hadn't been transferred. He'd been promoted. His name was Anatoly Kuzmin. When Petrov interviewed him, casually, over drinks, careful not to arouse suspicion, Kuzmin claimed he'd reported Volkov's lapse. He'd been rewarded for loyalty. Petrov nodded, played along. But when he checked Kuzmin's file later, he found something chilling. Kuzmin was also being watched. His promotions had placed him under closer scrutiny. His phone was tapped. His mail was opened. Stalin had rewarded him just enough to keep him close. Loyalty through betrayal was still a form of witness. and witnesses eventually had to go. March 1953. Anatoly Kuzmin received a package at his apartment. Inside, a brass pocket watch. No note, no return address. Just the watch. Ticking steadily. Kuzmin's face went white. He understood immediately. Stalin knew, not just about Volkov, about Kuzmin's role as informant, about his decision to report, about the fact that he'd observed Stalin's judgment. Kuzmin had thought himself safe. He'd thought betrayal would protect him. He was wrong. Within 48 hours, Kuzmin vanished. His apartment was emptied. His name was removed from guard rosters. His family received a letter. Comrade Kuzmin has been reassigned. Do not attempt to contact him. No one ever saw him again. Petrov pieced it together. Stalin wasn't eliminating a crime. He was eliminating knowledge. Anyone who'd witnessed the incident, even Stalin's own response to it, had to disappear. Volkov's 3-second lapse had proved that Stalin's security was penetrable. In the dictator's mind, that made the moment itself dangerous. The solution was total erasure. Remove everyone who knew, everyone who saw, everyone who might one day speak. The brass watch was the symbol. Time couldn't be rewound, but witnesses could vanish. Petrov realized he was next. He'd investigated too deeply, asked too many questions, connected too many dots. He prepared to run. Then, on March 5, 1953, everything changed. Joseph Stalin suffered a massive stroke. He died that same day, a verifiable historical fact, front-page news across the globe. Within hours, the transfer orders stopped. The machinery ground to a halt. Without Stalin's personal attention, the system lost its animating force. The paranoia that had driven it evaporated overnight. Surviving guards remained in their distant posts, but no new disappearances followed. Volkov stayed in Siberia. He died there in 1968, natural causes, age 63. He never returned to Moscow. His brass watch, the original, was never recovered. But the 6 replicas eventually surfaced in NKVD archives during the 1970s, cataloged as evidence markers. Petrov's investigation files were destroyed within weeks of Stalin's death. New leadership had no interest in excavating the old man's paranoia. The official story became simple. Routine transfers. Administrative reshuffling. Nothing to see. The truth died with the dictator. But the scars didn't. 127 guards displaced. 14 dead. 89 families relocated permanently. None of them ever learned why. Volkov's family lived in Siberia until the 1990s, long after the Soviet Union collapsed. His grandchildren never knew the full story, just vague family legends about a grandfather who'd served the state and been sent away. In the decades after Stalin's death, some records were unsealed. Most remained classified. The brass watch story emerged in the 1970s through testimony from an NKVD defector, a man who'd helped distribute the replicas and later fled to the West. Historians debated the details. Was it really 3 seconds? Did Stalin truly see Volkov asleep? Or did someone else report it? The evidence was fragmentary, contradictory, but the pattern was undeniable. Absolute power demanded absolute perfection. And when perfection failed, punishment was absolute too. The human cost was incalculable. Lives erased not for crimes, but for witnessing a tyrant's moment of judgment. The moral arithmetic of Stalin's state was simple. Better to destroy 100 innocent men than risk a single doubt in his authority. In 2007, Russian state archives released a partial batch of Kremlin Guard records from the Stalin era. Dmitri Volkov's name appeared on a list. No explanation for his transfer. No charges. Just one line. Administrative reassignment, December 1952. Next to his name, a small notation, almost invisible in the margins. Pocket watch. No context. No clarification. Researchers debated its meaning. Some thought it was a clerical code. Others believed it was a reference to evidence. A few who knew the broader story understood it for what it was: a marker, a symbol of Stalin's system, a reminder that in a state built on fear, even objects carried messages. The brass watches themselves, or at least the replicas, are now displayed in a Moscow museum, labeled NKVD evidence markers, 1952-53. Tourists pass by without understanding. The empty guard post, the 3:47 a.m. moment, the 3 seconds that erased 127 lives. They're just footnotes now, details in a history too vast and brutal to fully comprehend. But the fear that drove it, that never died. It just moved underground, waiting for the next dictator, the next system, the next moment when power decides that perfection is the only acceptable standard. Some failures are measured in seconds. Some punishments last generations. The watch kept ticking. The guards stopped existing. And the machine that consumed them kept running long after its creator was gone.